Hey guys, so I wanted to show you a quick little video of, this is going to be a Jeep video and a lighting video. I want to show you guys how to wire up your vehicle for off-road lighting. So, quick little thing about this Jeep is every light on here is halogen. These are like KC style halogen lights. They need to be cleaned, all the bug stuff on them. But these are KC style halogen lights. All these are KC style. They're not KC lights because each one of KC lights would have costed as much as all of these. These are just like, you know, Chinese lights or whatever. They work. The chrome on them has actually lasted for about 4 or 5 years now. It hasn't really rusted at all. I haven't had to replace any of the bulbs yet either. So, and the only LED lights I have are actually the 2 corner right here and then the 2 corner on the other side. And then I have 2 reverse lights at the bottom of the bumper down there. So first of all, I want to tell you right now, be careful when you buy LED lights, especially from Amazon or anything from China. They will claim, now there's a lot of people out there who have vehicles and they all have LED lights now because that's modern, and you know, I could have done that if I wanted to, but I like the way this looks. I don't know if you guys agree with me or not, but it's an old classic car. I like the old classic style look of the lights. But what people will do is they will buy a light bar, put it up on the top, especially for the Wrangler owners, and they'll claim, well, I got 300 watts or I got 400 watts of LED light bar power. No, you really do not, actually. I guarantee you the light output that they're claiming is, and this is not even, you know, some people will say, well, they're claiming equivalent to 400 watts of halogen. No, they're not even claiming that. They're just claiming 400 watts of LED power. You can take your tape measure, you can put your multimeter up to the light, and you can actually do the math for the amperage that is drawing for the voltage and find out how many watts the light is actually pulling. So for example, these on the corner claim 25 watts, but they're actually only pulling like 6 watts. So it's actually pretty pathetic. To be honest, I'm actually thinking of removing them down the road and putting standard rectangle shaped fog lights on there. And the reason why is because these fog lights are bright as shit. They may be halogen, but they are very bright. They are way brighter than these things. These things are good enough. They really are. At nighttime, you can see everything, but it's kind of a dark see everything, if that makes sense. But without those, I would not have been able to get that Jeep J10, the pickup truck, because when I went to the guy's house at nighttime, it was pitch black by the time I got there, and he had no lights, no porch lights, no nothing. So without these lights, I would not have been able to see. We would not have been able to load it up on the trailer. So they were a lifesaver, and I do like them, but they're not bright enough for me, if that makes sense. Anyway, to do this, you're going to need fuses, you're going to need relays, you're going to need wire, you're going to need a bus bar, which is where you put your ground wires, you're going to need a PDC, which is where you put your power wires, and then you need to go online and you need to look up the charts. They have charts online that will tell you the distance, the distance from the PDC to the light, and how thick of a wire you're going to need. So for example, these 3 lights in the middle are 100 watts. A car is 12 volts. So 100 watt divided by 12 is 8.3 amps. Now, a car doesn't really run at 12 volts. It actually runs at like 13.5 to 14 volts. Okay, so, but you want to go based off of 12. Does that make sense? But anyway, I went off of the 13.5 or 14 volts. I didn't go off of 12. 12 is really low. That's like if your alternator is not charging. So go off of, you know, whatever you're getting at your alternator. Does that make sense? So anyway, I went off of, let's say, 13.5. So 300 watts divided by, let's say 13. 300 watts divided by 13, I think is like 5 amps. So that's, what's that? 7, 14, 21, 5, 10, 15. So that's like what? 22, 23 amps, right? Okay. So for 23 amps, you want to look at your chart that I showed you guys online, and you want to take the gauge wire, and you also want to take your tape measure. So measure from the PDC through the firewall, and you want to measure it, use a flexible tape measure because you want to make it accurate. So mine goes down here through the firewall, up through the pillar, and then it stops like right about here in the headliner. So I think that was like 10 feet for me. So you want to take 23 amps and you want to look at the chart and see how much or how thick of a wire you need for 10 feet to not have any power loss. And this is important. You don't want to have a thin wire for a long run because it will actually create resistance. It'll make the wire warm or hot or hotter. And in doing that with the resistance, you're actually going to be lowering the voltage going to the light. So for mercury vapor lights or any of the outdoor lighting, that run off of 120 or 240, voltage drop is not hugely important. It is important, but it's not as important as it is for 12 volt because you have less of a margin for 12 volt than you would say like 125, right? So a 5 volt drop for a, let's say, 600 foot long run on this is not really going to affect these lights, okay? But a 1 volt drop on this will severely dim these lights out. Just 1 volt, okay? So going from, let's say, 12 volt to 11 volt or 13 to 12 is going to really dim these lights out. So anyway, on the chart for mine, for these 3 center lights, which are run off of 1 switch, 23 amps, let's say, right? Because I don't have everything written in front of me. I'm going based off of memory here. 23 amps on that chart said that a 12 gauge wire was good enough for that run. So what did I do? I went with a 10 gauge wire. So this is a, what is this? This is a 10 gauge wire. This is like an inline fuse. And the reason why I had to use an inline fuse and not my fuse box was because this fuse box could not handle, excuse me, a 10 gauge wire, unfortunately. I wish it could, but underneath was just too small to kind of really get the connectors properly. So I had to run an inline fuse for this one, which sucks, but it works, right? So here's the relay right here. The 10 gauge wire is running along here, just like it would. Now the ground does run in here. You can see the ground over here. The ground, everything runs down here. Got a 10 gauge wire going up here. And the 10 gauge wire stops in the headliner right here. Now, for these 3 lights, each one is 100 watts, let's say 8 or 7.5 amps. The run from here to here is only like 1.5 feet, 2 feet, 2.5 feet, right? So again, get your chart for 8 amps or 7 amps, whatever your math is, and then find out for 2 or 3 feet what kind of gauge wire you need so you don't have a voltage drop. So for me, I think it was 16 gauge, 16 or 18 gauge, I can't remember. So let's say 16 gauge. So I ran a 16 gauge wire from each light, 2.5, 3 feet over to the 10 gauge wire. All 3 lights go into the 10 gauge. Excuse me. And then the 10 gauge wire, again, comes over here into the relay, comes over into the fuse. And again, it was 23 amps, right? So you see a 30 amp fuse. I'm not going to put a 25 amp fuse if there's even such thing as a 25 amp fuse. I'm going to do 30 amps because you want a little bit of leeway, but not too much, right? So 30 amp fuse is what's powering those 3 lights over here. Now, what do relays do? A relay allows you to, excuse me, a relay allows you to have power right here and go directly to the lights. What they did in the past, especially for a vehicle like this, is this dash light switches and all that stuff. The switches were actually the relay and the fuse in one. It was really weird. So basically you have power running from here through the wire harness to the switch and then back and then to the headlights. So you have all these runs of wire going everywhere, and instead of just having a smaller wire coming from, let's say, the battery to the switch, the smaller wire would send a signal from the switch to the relay, which would be over here, right? So am I making sense to you guys? So long story short, here, I'll make this simple. This is my little switch setup down here. Notice the small wires? Those are like 18 gauge wires. They don't need to be thick, okay? So those wires are getting power from this on a 5 amp fuse, okay? So they're getting power from the battery the battery or the PDC over here, one of these blue ones. So they're getting power from this to a 5 amp fuse, and then that little power goes to the switch, and all that switch does is send a signal. When you open up the circuit, it sends a signal to this relay, and then that relay activates and sends power from the thicker wire here, getting power directly at the battery to the light. Does that make sense? So you have a small wire at the switch, which is just a signal wire, that's all it is, sending a signal to the relay to activate power directly from the PDC to this. So that's a better way of doing things. That's a more efficient way of doing things versus the switch actually being the signal and the power. Does that make sense? So now, instead of having power at my switch all the way to these headlights, I have power, or I have a signal at the switch directly to the headlight where the relay would be to turn the lights on. That's how you wire things. So for example, these window motors for the Jeep's power windows, they have no relay. So the power or the relay is actually in the master switch. That means the master switch actually has to send power directly from the switch, and the power comes all the way from over here, all the way to the master switch on the door. And when I want to roll, let's say, this window down back here, it has to send power from that switch all the way over here to that door. Instead, what you can do is have the switch act as a signal to get power to the relay, which should be like right here, and then send that to the door. So it's a shorter run and you get more power going to the door. Unfortunately, the way AMC and Chrysler did it with no relays is now these power windows only have like 10 or 11 volts going to them. Am I making sense here, guys? So this is why you want relays, why you want fuses. So long story short, run your thick wire to your PDC, your thick ground wire to your bus bar, then go online, learn how to wire up these relays and fuses. You run a small dedicated wire to your switch for just a signal, and then you send your power to your lights. It's very simple. Use your chart online that I was talking about and measure the distance from your PDC to your light. Find out how thick of a wire you need. So the reason why, again, I did 10 gauge, and this is actually the reason why I did 10 gauge, even though it said 12 was okay, was because if I wanted to, I could upgrade these 100 watt halogens to 120 watts, and the wire would still be thick enough for it. Same with these two outside lights. These two outside lights are running on 12 gauge wire right here. These two lights are running on 12 gauge wire. So because they're running on 12 gauge wire, I can again upgrade them from 100 to 120 watts and still have no issue at all. Even the fuses should be fine. So I hope this helps you guys. I'm sorry for not like being able to edit videos and do drawings and stuff for you, but very, very simple on how to do this, okay? I'm gonna go through this one last time. These small little wires you see right here are just the switch wires going to my switch. That switch, when you turn it on, will send a signal to the relay, and then the relay sends power to your lights. That's how this works. So if you want to do something like this, get a bus bar, get a PDC, get a fuse box. Very simple, very easy to do. It just takes time to wire all this stuff up. Follow the charts online so you know how thick of a wire to get. And this also goes back to the LED lights. The LED lights are running off of a 5 amp fuse in here. I could actually run off of like a 2 amp fuse or a 1 amp fuses if I wanted to, because they're only drawing like 6 watts, you know what I mean? So I actually have overkill on the lights right here. These are running off of a, I can't remember. I think these are running off of like a 14 gauge cable, and then they're running off of like my 18 gauge wire. So I could even still upgrade them to the 65 watt if I wanted to. But anyway, to answer the questions again, if you have a 300 watt or 400 watt light bar, don't go based off of that wattage that it says. You actually want to check with your multimeter to find out how many watts it's drawing. So if your 400 watt light bar is drawing 130 watts, then you do the measurement from wherever your power is going to be to that light. Look at the chart online. So 120 watts, you're only going to need like a 16 gauge cable, you know what I mean? You don't even need, or 14 gauge cable. You don't need a 12 or a 10 gauge. I've actually seen people wire a 300 watt or 400 watt light bar up to a 10 gauge wire. That is overkill because it's not drawing 400 watts. It's only drawing like 100 watts of power. You have to check these things before you actually do this and waste your money. So anyway, I hope this helps you guys. Again, sorry, I don't know how to edit videos or do drawings for you. If you need the drawings or whatever, you know, look it up online. This is just a video to explain how I did this, and simple math on how to get the amperage and then the wattage and then the gauge of the wire you need, etc. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys have a great day, and yes, I know I need to clean this ground terminal. Thank you.